Welcome to the Success Portal by XRM. This particular video is about data migration for Microsoft Dynamics CRM. The audience of this video is anyone who is contemplating bringing existing data into their instance of Microsoft Dynamics CRM, whether it's CRM Online or partner-hosted or on-premise. In our experience, there are several issues that come up over and over again that present challenges when it comes to simple data migrations. What we're going to do in this video is discuss those very common challenges. We'll provide some examples and then provide some ways in which you might be able to mitigate the issues. But also, you'll learn about how sometimes apparently simple data migrations may be a little more challenging and time-consuming than you might imagine. So let's begin. First of all, the structure of the system that you're migrating from may be different than Dynamics CRM. Now, what is meant by that? The structure of the system. First of all, systems come in all shapes and sizes. This so-called system could be a series of Excel spreadsheets. It could also be a SQL database or an Oracle database or any other kind of database that may be structured differently than Microsoft Dynamics CRM. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a couple of examples of data, and we're going to see how that presents a challenge, and then we'll talk a little bit about what you can do about it. So have a look at this. What you're looking at right now is an example of some what we might call perfect data. This is a lead, okay, or this is a series of leads. This is 9 leads to be specific, and we are looking at columns. Okay, first name, last name, email, street, 1, city, state, zip. Typical fields in a database. And we're looking at rows. These are the records. These are the leads. Each one of these is a lead. The reason why this is practically perfect data is because it actually came from CRM. And so what that means is that Dynamics CRM has a first name, a last name, an email address, a street, city, state, and it has a lot of other fields as well. But these fields are, first of all, named exactly as they are in CRM. And second of all, the data is structured exactly the way that the data is structured natively in CRM. Now, let's take a look at some data that may come from a different system that may be structured slightly differently. And we'll go through a few different examples of that. So let's take a look at this one. Now, here is some data from another system. In this particular system, we have a couple of differences. First of all, we have a column called full name. Second of all, we have a column called company. And then we have email, street, and so forth. So, a couple of issues. Number one, there is no full name on the lead in CRM. There is a first name and a last name. And that's concatenated together at the application layer, if you will, in CRM to provide the name of the lead. Now that's true of contacts as well in CRM. You can't import the full name of the contact. You must have discrete columns. So this is an example of a difference in structure. Another example is company. Well, on the lead in CRM, there are two ways to approach this. There is a company name field on the lead in CRM. But if it's an existing company that already exists in the system, there's also a lookup. So here you have full name and company, and you have to immediately make a decision as to whether or not you're going to utilize the lookup field in CRM to an existing company, or whether or not you're going to simply map this column to a field that exists in CRM, a text field. So this difference in structure here leads to decisions that have to be made and, to be frank, work that has to be done. So let's just take, for example, you need to bring this data in from this other system, and you need to do it using the translation between full name and first and last name. Well, there's some work there that has to be done. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. Secondly, let's talk about the company. Let's say that, well, you know what? These leads are actually an existing company that we have in our database. So we don't necessarily want to use a text field on the lead. What we want to do is realize these as actual data objects. In that particular case, you would be taking two imports, and the first import would be an import to the account entity in CRM, and you just grab these columns, company, that information right there, the company and the address information. You'd import those first as companies or accounts, and then you would import the data that you then separated out with first and last name as leads, looking up to those companies that already existed. So there's the first example that we have of differing data structure. Let's do another example. Once again, here is the data from the lead entity in CRM, and you'll see typical columns, first name, last name, email, street, one, city, and so forth. Now this example is from an actual alternative system. This particular system is called Sugar CRM, and it structures its email quite differently than other systems do. So let's take a look at that. In Sugar CRM, this is what a lead might look like. We have an ID. Now, most systems have IDs. Those are unique IDs, and they're useful, and you certainly need to retain those when you do your data import. But the point is that the email, you'll notice something missing here, or missing from some perspective, is that there's no email column. That's a very important difference in the sense that where is the email address for the lead? Well, in Sugar CRM, they actually break it up slightly different from an architectural perspective. Now you'll see here this is email in a column. Here we have a second entity called email. And now you'll see some email addresses here with a key that is common between the two tables. This is a related entity. This allows any number of email addresses for one lead tied together with a common key. This is called a key. Now that is a fundamental difference in the architecture of two systems. Very fundamental difference. There's a number of ways to get around this and to mitigate this. Now there are a number of ways to get around this, all of which are rather time-consuming. I don't think we can really go into them all in this particular video. That's not what this video is about. It's not a how-to to solve all the data migration problems. It's just to merely illustrate that it exists. One way to do it, would be to use Power Pivot to join the two Excel spreadsheets together and then work with that data in a way that you could translate these multiple records into columns in your database. That's one way. Another way to do it would be to use a third-party application. You'll hear us talk about it quite often, called Scribe. And Scribe has this ability to transform the data in these kind of complex relationships into data that will work to bring into CRM. But the point is that this particular issue is a challenge. And as you can see and imagine, it will be some work to get these two systems to translate their data into a way that's common between them. Okay, let's go back and discuss other issues that come up. Users of the old system may have played games with the use of fields. Now, this generally occurs because of limitations in the original system. And the best way for you to see this is examples. And so I'll bring up an example now. Have a look at this data. The only real difference between this data and the data we've been looking at is that there's an additional column. And what you see very often is in some systems there's extraneous fields that people find out through use of the system that those fields are not used that much. So right now the street, in this particular set of data, street 4 is a field that people have decided to use, some people, for notes. Because maybe they didn't have a notes field, or maybe it was convenient, maybe it was there, maybe the system wasn't that flexible. But now you have Street 4 containing data regarding notes. Now, why is this a problem? Well, it certainly isn't a problem when you have 9 records. It becomes a problem when you have 90,000 records, or 9,000, or even 900 records. And not only that, but maybe Street 4 isn't the only one they're doing this with. Maybe there's half a dozen other columns, and maybe different people have used those columns for different things over the years. This is, again, another problem. Now, what's the answer? Well, the answer is simply know your data and clean it up beforehand. But again, and this video is again designed to explain how data migrations can present challenges. And it really all has to do with the data that exists in that other system and how it's been used. So this is just a second example. We'll continue on with our other examples. Things we find quite often is that fields that have to be separated can lead to column drift. The best way to illustrate this is by an example. So here we have an issue where we know that we have a full name with what is going to be several columns in CRM. So what we need to do is split that up. When we split this up, let's take a look, create a few columns, use something like a utility like text to columns, use the space delimiter, which is pretty much all we have, and then we finish up and replace the cells. Well, what actually happened? Well, if this is the salutation, that's good. If this is the first name, that's what that would be. If this is the middle initial, and then this is the last name, and this is the suffix, we have a couple of issues here. You can see what happened to the data. Salutation worked out okay, and the first name worked out okay, but look what happened when we started talking about the middle. And then the last. You can get a sense, anybody who didn't have a middle initial ends up with McKay as the middle, and this is what's called column drift. Again, this is not a problem when you have 9 records. It's a problem when you have 9,000 or 900. It's time consuming. It's not a deal breaker, but it's time consuming. There are a number of ways to get around this, but pretty much rolling up your sleeves and cleansing the data is pretty much the only system that really works well. Now, there's a number of third-party tools that you might find, but the point is this. The point is that this is an issue that comes up that needs to be dealt with. People clean their data and deal with this all the time. Nevertheless, it needs to be done in order to bring the data into CRM to make it sensible. And what's the last? The last issue, which is another common issue, is that there's a lack of unique identifiers that can cause imports to fail. It's a little more time consuming to show this, but we can walk through it and explain it. Let's focus on this data right here. If you take a careful look at this, these 2 records, you'll see they actually represent the same company. It's called a third company LLC. Now, what this particular system does is it records one as a headquarters and one as a branch office. We're going to bring this into CRM, and if the company name is the same for these 2, it's not as though the import, you can make it so the import won't fail. You can bring the data in. The problem becomes when you begin to bring the people, the contacts that work for that company into CRM. CRM won't know which third company it is, and the import will fail. So if you've got Sydney and Scott working for this same company at 2 different branches, and you attempt to import this data, when you try to associate them with a third company LLC, those records will fail because there's 2 a third company LLCs in the database. Now, how do you get around that? Well, to get around that, again, this is an issue that there's two ways to get around it, and this is an issue that has to be considered, discussed, and then made a decision upon. So in this particular case, you could actually change the name to a third company LLC-HQ and a third company LLC-branch office or BO. But you don't necessarily have to do that. There's another way, and that's with a unique identifier. Take a look at this data. Here's a set of data from the old system that has two companies named exactly the same, but two totally separate unique identifiers. As long as you have those unique identifiers in the system from the old system, okay, you'll be able to distinguish which of these two these people belong to. So here's Sydney, who we know belongs to that company because those two pieces of information match. So that's two ways to get around it. One is you rename the company and use the name to be the unique identifier and make your data unique, or you bring in a unique identifier from the other system. But again, the whole point of this video is to explain that that is something that has to be done, that has to be thought about, that has to be worked on, and that has to be prepared for the successful importation of data. Well, we hope this helped a little bit in you understanding some of the challenges that you may face when you're going to bring data into CRM. We lightly touched upon some of the tools that will help you with respect to, Excel's an obvious tool. There's a couple others, and we'll bring them up and talk about them briefly. One is a tool that we use that we appreciate very much, and that's Scribe. It's a third party, it's an application, and it's a service as well that is in the cloud. And it allows for good connectors that go between disparate systems and Microsoft Dynamics CRM. It's a platform that you can use to do data integration, which is an ongoing concept of two systems talking to each other, or migration, which is what we were mainly talking about here. Another tool is PowerPivot. PowerPivot's a free tool from Microsoft. This is if you're more of a roll-up-your-sleeves type person. This is where you can join tables together and work with. This is PowerPivot for Excel 2010. 2013, it's built into the product. So, that's just a couple of quick tools that you can think about using. The point is, though, is that to be ready, to be prepared, and to understand some of the challenges that could occur when bringing data into Microsoft Dynamics CRM. We hope this helps, and thank you very much.